If you are a man over 45 and have gone to a party or a bar or opened a newspaper recently and felt invisible, you are not crazy. You also aren't expired. The world tells older men that if we aren't being looked at, then we don't exist. It tells us that we need to chase trends or apologize for who we are just to have a seat at the table. I did that for years. I tried to play the game. Then I realized the game is rigged, and that it wasn't me who lost my ability to connect. I just outgrew the room. Today, I want to talk about the great escape and why so many masculine men are quietly packing their bags and leaving the scene and the culture for good, and why it might be the best thing you ever do for your sanity. My name's Frank Schneider, my friends call me Fritz, and this is Daddybear America. So around 2012, there was a shift in the country. Basically, Bernie Sanders started running on a Democratic Socialist ticket, which was basically that the system was rigged against us in favor of the millionaires and billionaires. And this was a very strong message for a lot of Democrats, but also there was some crossover into Team Red and conservative Republicans who also felt disadvantaged by the system. It was a very effective message. And at that time, the Democrats and HRC needed a message that would compete with the Democratic Socialist, basically class-based economic message. And what they came up with was identity groups and favoring identity groups rather than giving a clean economic message. This also spread to other institutions. You could see the shift around 2015, 2016 in news and journalism from the likes of MSNBC, NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, all started shifting their message away from economic disadvantages for poor and middle class to group identity disadvantages for different identities that were considered victimized historically. This also could be called woke. You could also see this message resonating throughout higher ed and Ivy League universities like Harvard, Yale, Cornell. I mean, you can go through the list. Brown. A number of different universities started shifting their merit-based system to one of endless empathy, where instead of allowing the highest achieving students and into their student body, they started picking historically disadvantaged groups that belong to particular identities to be admitted at higher levels. And if you were white male, you were probably going to be at a disadvantage from here out. And that's been going on for the past 10 years, at least. It was around this time that terms like the patriarchy started occurring. Colonization was becoming a popular trend word, or colonizers and survivors. And white males were generally associated with both colonizers and the patriarchy. And somehow gay white men also got grouped into this idea that men were rigging the system against minority groups and women. So along with higher ed institutions and journalistic entities, this messaging started to creep into Hollywood as well. For the first time, a lot of the messaging behind movies from the likes of Disney and Paramount and LucasArts with major entities like the Star Wars and Star Trek started leaning into the messages that were being conveyed from higher ed and the Democratic Party as well as HRC. It was a message about Acceptance, sure.
Black Lives Matter, the NAACP. The goal is not really to promote Star Trek, but to promote these organizations and to use our platform to be able to bring greater awareness to these very, very important messages and places.
But also that they were going to do away with merit-based systems that basically allowed the highest achieving and most skilled people to get to the higher levels of the industries. It was now going to be that identity groups were promoted rather than operating by a meritocracy. Specifically, in the news recently was LucasArts and Carolyn Kennedy, I believe was her name, who was the director of LucasArts and specifically Star Wars. The first time I saw these messages start to creep into storylines of movies was with Star Wars. I think it was The Force Awakens or Rogue One, where all of a sudden there were these very insufferable lead characters. And I didn't understand why they were there, why they were so unlikable, and why there weren't male leads that we were used to in the Star Wars franchise. I didn't realize at the time there was a message that was creeping through all institutions and organizations right down to the movies that I was watching. Basically, they were killing off the male leads in the storylines and they were replacing them with female leads and girl bosses. The same thing at the same time was happening in the gaming industry, which some of you know I dabble in. I wasn't a huge gamer. So while all these shifts are occurring in institutions and higher level education, as well as Hollywood and the gaming industry, there's also a shift occurring in the LGBTQIA++, did I say that right? Two-spirit LGBTQIAA++ community that is steering away from the patriarchy and male white leadership towards, again, these identity groups that were considered historically disenfranchised, but also inventing new historically inaccurate groups like Two-Spirit. A term which was created in the 1990s, by the way. So gay men were considered the patriarchy, and then we were disenfranchised by the very groups that we had tried to help. So basically, we open the door, they enter, and then they kick us out, is what basically happened. We were seen as part of the problem because we signify traditional masculinity. Two words, traditional and masculinity, which were considered toxic by all of these minority and victim groups who have supposedly been oppressed by traditional values and masculinity. This is also reinforcing the idea that we are not leaning into a meritocracy anymore or who is really good at what they do, but rather we are going to promote people that belong to particular identity groups, not necessarily because they are the most skilled at what they're doing. And ultimately, the point for a lot of men and gay men at this point is, why would you stick in a group where the new host hates you? Well, the obvious answer is you wouldn't, and then therefore you would leave. So I've definitely felt this. I have been in various appointed groups in the LGBT community. I have volunteered at various times in my career, and I've also done professional consulting work for LGBT groups. And the slide has been noticeable, and the fact that I don't get hired as much is clear, and it's not because of my attitudes, which weren't I didn't even have attitudes back then. It was because of my identity, that I was gay, that I was male, and that I was white. So what I ended up doing was walking away. And ultimately, I still work as a consultant, and I work for groups that don't involve themselves in identity or racial grouping of any sort, because that's racist and sexist. If you're grouping particular people and then advantaging them or disadvantaging them based on their appearance or their sexuality or their gender, that is basically unconstitutional. That we shouldn't be doing that. So I associate with groups that specifically don't insulate themselves in a particular way, whether it's ideologically or by gender or by sexuality or these types of groupings. I stopped watching a lot of the movies that had the message in it that was leaning into a lot of the lean-in type messaging that was created in the 2014s through the 2025s. I stopped watching a lot of the TV shows that I used to enjoy, like Star Wars and Star Trek. I started reading news that wasn't so biased against my identity. I stopped associating with groups that had a war on meritocracy and a war on competence. I stopped associating with groups that forced diversity. And I stopped contributing to groups that had a culture of apology. I don't really subscribe to the idea of apologizing for ancestral wrongs when I did not do anything wrong. And for that matter, it seems that certain groups are being pushed to apologize where certain other groups are not. I don't align myself with any groups that ideologically lock themselves to identity politics. So if all of a sudden there is a promotion that isn't about competence, but it's about diversity and it's ideological, then I'm just not going to want to associate with that group. And ever since I made this change, I have been in a much better state of mind, not feeling like I'm being forced to apologize or accept some ideology or, some pronouns or something like this that I don't really subscribe to, that doesn't adhere to any scientific reasoning or logic, that it's basically an identity group or a war on competence or forced diversity that has nothing to do with me or anything that I want to do with. And so I end up in a much saner place because I'm basically choosing who I will do business with, who I will subscribe to, the shows that I watch. I'm much more careful in curating what kind of information I'm consuming. I still consume information from all political groups, right or left, as long as it's not identity-based and against competency and towards forced diversity. And then as far as our community, the gay community, it really seems to have lost its way altogether. Until it starts accepting people like me, I don't see myself as wanting to contribute to it in the future in the same way that I did in the past. All right, guys, if you like this video or you appreciate material like this, do all the things down below. And Google thinks you might like this video here, and YouTube would like you to watch this video here. Go ahead, click it. Go on, click this one.